Growing up in Cedar Springs, Texas, the sharp scent of disappointment lingered in Matthew Collins' childhood home like the ever-present dust from the endless prairie wind. It wasn't the kind of town where secrets lasted long, especially not the kind of secrets that came home on your father's collar in the form of cheap perfume or whispered phone calls in the dead of night. But the worst betrayals weren't the ones that made the rounds at Sunday church. They were the ones carved quietly into your family, right beneath your skin. From a young age, Matt understood that his father, Richard Collins, wasn't like other dads. Richard owned a small chain of car dealerships and wore his charm like an old pair of boots worn, cracked, but somehow still convincing to everyone but his own family. He was always gone before breakfast, promising late meetings and long test drives, and often stumbled home long after Matt was in bed. On the rare nights he did join them for dinner, his mother Elaine would serve the meal in silence, a practiced smile fixed on her face, her eyes never quite meeting Richard's pouted. Matt's earliest memories were filled with the background hum of adult arguments, muffled through thin walls, or the sound of his mother quietly crying behind the laundry room door. Sometimes, she'd take him to Dairy Queen for ice cream after a particularly bad night, trying to drown the tension with chocolate sprinkles and soft serve. He learned early how to read the weather in his own house, to recognize the warning signs of a coming storm, the way his father's voice got sharp, or how his mother's hands trembled as she folded shirts that didn't belong to her. Despite it all, Elaine Collins never spoke badly about her husband. She patched the holes in the drywall and stitched the tears in Matt's heart with the same gentle hands, insisting that love could weather any storm. "People make mistakes, honey," she'd say, as if reciting a prayer. "You have to be strong. Family is everything." But the cracks in their marriage were visible, even to a child. Matt watched as his mother shrank in on herself year after year, her laughter growing softer, her presence in the house fading into something ghost-like. By the time Matt was 10, he'd lost count of the times Richard had come home with lipstick on his collar or a new excuse on his lips. And still, his mother stayed. The worst of it came one Saturday afternoon when Matt was 11. His father took him out, saying he wanted to spend time with his boy. They stopped for sodas, then drove across town to a tidy little house Matt didn't recognize. A woman in a red dress opened the door, smiling a little too brightly, and invited them inside. While the adults disappeared into the back, Matt sat on the floor and petted her old beagle, trying not to think about why his stomach felt twisted in knots. After an hour, bored and restless, Matt walked home by himself, the Texas sun hot on his back. He didn't tell his mother where he'd been, not at first. But a few days later, the truth slipped out over dinner, and Elaine just nodded, her face unreadable. 2 days later, when Matt accidentally broke a plate, his father punished him harshly, not for the plate, Matt would later realize, but for snitching about the visit. That night, as he lay in bed nursing his welts, Matt promised himself he would never become his father. He would never hurt someone who loved him, never build a family on lies and broken promises. He wanted the kind of love he'd only read about, the kind that didn't leave bruises, physical or otherwise. Still, the wounds of betrayal run deep. As Matt grew older, the lesson etched into his bones was a harsh one. Trust is fragile. Love can be a weapon. And even the most determined child cannot save a marriage doomed by secrets. He watched his mother finally gather the courage to leave, watched her rebuild her life, and eventually find happiness with a gentleman named Walter Brooks, who treated her with the kindness she always deserved. Matt never forgot the early years, though. Every relationship he entered was colored by the fear that history would repeat itself. He became vigilant, almost to a fault, guarding his heart with the fierce resolve of someone who knew how much it hurt to bleed. Yet, despite his caution, he remained quietly hopeful. Somewhere deep inside, the boy who watched his mother suffer still believed in the possibility of something better, a love built on honesty, respect, and trust. He dreamed of one day giving someone the stability and devotion his own family had never known. But life, as Matt would learn, had its own storms waiting just beyond the horizon. By his senior year at Cedar Springs High, Matthew Collins had mastered the art of blending in. He kept his head down, worked hard in class, and stayed clear of drama, determined to be nothing like his father, no big gestures, no secrets, and definitely no broken promises. But sometimes, the world has other plans. And for Matt, everything changed the day Madison Parker walked into Mrs. O'Connor's English class. Madison was nothing like the other girls at Cedar Springs. Fresh from Houston, she brought with her a confidence that seemed at odds with her quiet smile. Her hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, her gaze steady and curious as she took the only empty seat right beside Matt. He tried not to stare, but something about her energy, her effortless way of existing, made it impossible not to notice her. Their first conversation was a disagreement over honesty of all things. Mrs. O'Connor had posed a question: is it ever okay to lie to protect someone you love? The class split into predictable camps. Madison, without hesitation, declared a lie is a lie, no matter how small. Matt, careful and thoughtful, argued that sometimes the truth could be a weapon, hurting more than it helped. Their debate drew laughs and groans, but neither backed down. After class, Madison caught up to him at his locker. "You really believe that?" she asked, her eyes narrowed in curiosity. Matt shrugged, a bit embarrassed. "I guess I just know what lies can do." That was all it took. Over the next weeks, their friendship blossomed. They shared lunches under the old oak by the football field, exchanged playlists, and traded secrets that felt too heavy for anyone else. Madison told Matt about her life in Houston, the endless noise, her mother's long hours as a nurse, the loneliness of being the new kid everywhere. Matt, in turn, told her about Cedar Springs, about his mom's quiet strength, and just enough about his dad to let her understand the shadows he carried. Their bond was something fragile but growing. There were movie nights with Madison's mom, Karen, who welcomed Matt like a son, and weekends spent exploring the countryside on borrowed bikes. Madison had a way of making even the dullest afternoon feel like an adventure. For the first time, Matt believed in the possibility of building something good from broken parts. One late autumn evening, as they sat side by side on the hood of Matt's old pickup, watching the sun slip behind the prairie, Madison broke the silence. "I don't want to be my parents," she said softly. "I want something different. Honest, no secrets. If you ever feel like you can't trust me, I want you to tell me right then, no matter how hard it island." Matt's heart thudded in his chest. He reached for her hand, feeling the tremor in his own. "Me too. I can't promise I'll be perfect, but I'll never lie to you, I swear." She squeezed his hand, her smile, small but certain. "Then let's promise, right now, no matter what, we're honest, even when it hurts." He nodded. The weight of his childhood lifted just a little in that moment. Their vow was earnest, youthful, and perhaps a bit naive, but it was real. For Matt and Madison, it was the first brick in a foundation they both hoped would last. Of course, neither of them could know how life would test that promise in the years to come. But for now, beneath the endless Texas sky, hope was enough. Autumn in Cedar Springs had a way of making the familiar seem uncertain. By the time Matt and Madison had settled into their senior year, the golden leaves drifting along the sidewalks did little to mask the quiet changes beginning to take root beneath the surface of their lives. Matt, ever the steady hand, found himself falling into a comfortable routine with Madison. Their days were filled with shared glances across classrooms, study sessions in the public library, and lazy afternoons at the town's one good coffee shop. Madison's presence in his life was a gentle balm, soothing the old anxieties left behind by his parents' failures. For a while, Matt allowed himself to believe that their promise, no secrets, no lies, could be enough to keep the past at bay. But real life, as Matt well knew, was never that simple. Small things began to change. Madison's text replies grew shorter. Her laughter at his jokes came a second too late, and she spent more and more evenings working late at the animal shelter. Matt tried to ignore the flickers of doubt. He reminded himself of their vow, of the honesty that anchored their love. Yet, beneath his rationalizations, the old unease began to stir. One Thursday, while Matt was waiting for Madison outside the shelter, he caught a glimpse of her talking with a new volunteer, a tall, easygoing guy named Ethan Carter. The two laughed about something, Madison's face lighting up in a way that Matt hadn't seen in weeks. When she finally joined him, she apologized for being late, but her explanation felt rehearsed, her smile a shade too polite. The following days, the cracks widened. Madison started canceling plans at the last minute, citing extra shifts or group projects. Her mother, Karen, always seemed distracted, offering vague answers when Matt asked after Madison. Friends noticed too. Becky, Madison's closest friend, asked Matt if everything was okay between them. He insisted it was. Still, the weight of suspicion pressed in. One evening, as he walked Madison home after a school event, Matt finally gave voice to his fear. "Is there something you're not telling me?" he asked quietly, trying to keep his tone even. Madison hesitated, her eyes searching his face. For a moment, Matt thought she might finally break their uncomfortable silence with the truth. Instead, she shook her head. "Just tired, that's all. I've got a lot on my plate right now." He wanted to believe her. He tried to remember the promise they'd made under the wide Texas sky, but doubt had already found its way in. That night, lying awake in his room, Matt realized that trust, once cracked, was never quite the same. He wondered if love could really hold, or if it, too, was just glass beautiful, but so easily broken. Outside, the first cold wind of winter rattled the windows, and Matt felt the chills settle somewhere deep inside him. Matt Collins woke to a heaviness that morning, a sense that something was shifting, just out of reach. For days, the gap between him and Madison had widened, filled with half-truths and unspoken doubts. The honesty that once bound them now felt brittle, stretched thin by missed calls, canceled plans, and awkward silences at the animal shelter where they used to laugh together. It was a cold Saturday in December when Matt's phone rang from an unfamiliar number. He almost let it go to voicemail. Who answers unknown numbers on the weekend? But something made him pick up. "Hello, this is Matt." A man's voice replied, steady and a little formal. "Matt, this is Charlie Graham. I work with Madison at the shelter." Matt sat up, suddenly alert. "Is everything okay?" Charlie's words came carefully. "She's fine, but I wanted you to know something. I've seen this before, son. I was married for 16 years, lost it all because I trusted too much." He paused. Madison's been spending a lot of time with Ethan Carter. Lunches together almost every day. Yesterday, they were making plans for dinner. Said something about a new Italian place downtown, then maybe going out for drinks. She seemed excited. Matt's stomach knotted. He stared at the wall, silent. "I'm not trying to cause trouble," Charlie added quietly. "But I would have wanted someone to tell me before it was too late." The call ended, but the words echoed in Matt's mind. He tried to tell himself it was nothing, that Madison had always been friendly, that Ethan was just a coworker, but the details didn't add up. Why the secrecy? Why had Madison started coming home late, making excuses, avoiding eye contact? The same patterns he'd witnessed as a child replayed themselves in the corners of his memory. Broken promises, late-night arguments, the ache of betrayal that never fully healed. He thought of his mother, how she'd endured his father's affairs in silence, how the truth had finally come crashing down, shattering everything. Matt swore he'd never repeat those mistakes. He would not be a victim of someone else's dishonesty. Still, he hesitated. Should he confront Madison? Pretend nothing was wrong? Wait and see? Every option seemed loaded with pain. His pulse hammered as he weighed each scenario, picturing every possible outcome, asking himself what he could actually live with. Finally, he made up his mind. He reached out to an old friend, Oliver Brooks, who'd gone into private investigation after a stint in law enforcement. "Ollie, I need you to help me find out the truth. I need to know." Oliver agreed without judgment, promising discretion. "Better to have answers than regrets," he said. Matt spent the rest of the day moving through his routine work, laundry, coffee at the diner, trying to act normal, trying not to let suspicion gnaw away the last shreds of peace he'd managed to build with Madison. But the seed was planted. For the first time in his life, Matt realized that sometimes the scariest thing isn't betrayal, it's not knowing for sure. He went to bed that night with a single solemn vow. Whatever the truth turned out to be, he would face it head on. He refused to live a lie, no matter the cost. Matt spent the entire day pretending. Outwardly, nothing in the Collins home seemed out of place. The sun streaming in through the kitchen window, the quiet drip of coffee into his mug, the usual banter with his neighbor, Mrs. Doyle, as he fetched the morning paper. But inside, Matt's mind was a churning storm. Every word, every silence between him and Madison felt like walking a tightrope over an abyss. She moved around the house that morning with a practiced ease, humming as she checked her phone, breezing through their goodbye with a quick smile. "Don't wait up. Group project might run late." It was the kind of line you could almost believe if you hadn't already heard the truth from someone else. Matt remembered Charlie Graham's call and the way it had pulled the ground out from beneath him. He had spent the last 24 hours in a state of numbness, balancing on the edge of anger and heartbreak. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was realizing just how expertly Madison had learned to hide it. He tried to lose himself in routine running errands, mowing the lawn, even organizing his garage. But at every turn, reminders of their shared life stared back. A note Madison had left on the fridge, a scarf draped over the banister, the half-used bottle of her favorite perfume on the bathroom counter. Each small thing felt like a fragment of a world that no longer existed. By late afternoon, the sun dipped behind a band of gray clouds. Matt took a long shower and sat on the edge of their bed, staring at the fading blue sheets. He wondered how long he'd been lying to himself, too afraid to admit that the promise they'd made to each other, their vow of honesty, had already been broken. Somewhere in the house, Madison's laughter drifted in from a FaceTime call. He heard Ethan Carter's name, spoken softly, with a warmth that stung. Dusk settled over Cedar Springs, and Matt could wait no longer. He called Oliver Brooks. "Ollie, anything?" Oliver's voice was grim. "They're at Bella Vista on Main, sharing a bottle of wine. Just ordered dessert. After, they're headed to the Marigold Inn." Matt thanked him and hung up, his chest tightening. His next actions felt mechanical, packing a duffel with Madison's clothes, collecting her shoes, pulling her favorite books and framed photos from the shelves. He boxed up her mementos, concert tickets, birthday cards, the ceramic mug she made for him the first Christmas they spent together. It all went by the door, neat and impersonal. He couldn't bring himself to cry. Instead, he called his lawyer, Susan Miller, and left a message. "I'm ready to move forward. Please draw up the divorce papers." He texted Madison's mother, Karen, simply, "I think you should check in on Madison tomorrow. She'll need you." Night fell, and the house felt impossibly large. Matt cooked himself dinner, scrambled eggs and toast, the simplest thing he could stomach. He ate, standing at the counter, staring at the empty chair across from him. The silence was crushing. At 10:37 p.m., his phone buzzed. Madison's name lit up the screen. "Hey, babe, still at the hotel. Having a good time with everyone. Don't wait up. Love you." Matt stared at the message, his hands steady but his mind racing. The cruelty of it, so casual, so undeserved, almost made him laugh. He didn't reply. He spent the next hour gathering the last of her things, carrying boxes out to her car. He emptied her side of the closet, took down the photos of their vacation in Colorado, even the little notes she'd tucked into his lunch when they were first dating. Every trace, every memory packed away. He parked her car outside the garage, left the keys on the seat, and changed the locks. He sat in the darkness, exhausted. The hurt was sharp, but beneath it was an iron resolve. For so long, Matt had defined himself by his capacity to forgive, to hope, to believe in the best in those he loved. But there was a limit, a line he would not allow anyone to cross. Tonight, he had reached it. The hours crawled by. At midnight, rain began to drum against the windows. Matt stood in the kitchen, staring at the storm, remembering every moment that had led to this. He thought of his mother, Elaine, and her years of endurance, of his father's endless absences and the way betrayal had poisoned their home. He had sworn to be different, and in this, at least, he had succeeded. He had not become his father. He had refused to become his mother. He poured himself a whiskey, sitting at the table as the storm raged outside. In that lonely hour, Matt found clarity, not peace, but acceptance. He had done what needed to be done. There would be pain ahead, arguments, maybe even regret. But there would be no more lies, no more second-guessing. At dawn, Madison returned. She found her car in the driveway, her belongings neatly packed inside. The new locks turned coldly against her key. She knocked once, twice, and finally hammered on the door, her voice trembling. "Matt, let me in. We can talk about this, please." From the other side, Matt answered with quiet finality. "No, Madison, you made your choice. Now I'm making mine." She wept, pleading, her words muffled by the rain. But Matt didn't answer again. He sat by the window, watching the sunrise chase away the storm, and realized that for the first time in years, he was free, heartbroken, but free. And as Cedar Springs came alive with a new day, Matt promised himself never again would he allow anyone to shatter his trust. From now on, his life would be his own, no matter how lonely the road ahead. Sunlight cut across the empty kitchen like a fresh wound, illuminating every inch of absence left behind. Matt Collins stood in the silence, the echoes of the previous night still rattling around his mind. For the first time in years, his home felt both utterly hollow and unmistakably his. Madison's belongings were gone, her laughter erased from the walls, the perfume she always wore lingering only faintly in the hall. All that remained was quiet and the stubborn throb of something like relief. Word travels fast in Cedar Springs. By noon, everyone who mattered seemed to know. Becky Parker texted, "Heard what happened. Are you okay?" His mother, Elaine, left a dozen voicemails, her voice cracking between concern and disappointment. Karen Parker, Madison's mother, came by, pleading through the locked door. "Just talk to her, Matt. She's young. People make mistakes." But Matt stayed silent. He wasn't angry anymore. He was tired. Tired of defending his choices. Tired of explaining the unexplainable. That afternoon, he drove through town in a daze, passing familiar landmarks that now felt strange. The old coffee shop, the library where he and Madison had once studied for finals, the river park where they'd made promises that seemed unbreakable at the time. Everything looked the same, yet nothing was. Even his job at the dealership felt off. His coworkers offered awkward nods, nobody daring to ask the obvious questions. The pressure from both families mounted. Elaine called again, her tone now pleading. "Matt, don't do something you'll regret. Forgiveness is the foundation of any marriage." Matt stared at the ceiling that night, remembering his mother's tears after his father's betrayals. He understood her now in a way he never had before, the difference between endurance and self-preservation. Elaine had stayed, believing that love meant swallowing pain. Matt had chosen a different path. It hurt, but it was clean. He tried to distract himself with routine, jogging at sunrise, reorganizing the garage, cleaning the windows until they sparkled. But everywhere he turned, there were ghosts, Madison's handwriting on a sticky note, the worn cushion where she used to curl up with a book, a pair of earrings forgotten on the bathroom counter. He boxed up what was left, drove to Madison's office, and left the package at the front desk. "For Madison Parker?" he told the receptionist. "No, she won't need to call me." Madison made her last attempt at reconciliation on a rainy Thursday evening. She stood on the porch, soaked, her eyes red-rimmed and desperate. "Matt, please. We can work through this. I made a mistake. I just want a chance to make it right." He opened the door, but only enough to speak through the crack. "Forgiveness isn't forgetting, Madison. You have to live with your choices. So do I." She wept, clinging to the hope that had kept her afloat for weeks. But Matt's heart didn't budge. He closed the door gently, locking it behind him. He watched her walk away, her figure shrinking in the rain, and felt a pang of sadness for the people they once were before everything broke. That night, he found a letter slipped under the door. Madison's handwriting was shaky, the words raw with regret and longing. She wrote of her shame, her confusion, the moments she wished she could erase. She begged for one last conversation, one more chance to explain herself. Matt read the letter twice, folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer beside old photographs and mementos from a life that no longer belonged to him. Days passed, the initial shock giving way to a peculiar emptiness. Friends tried to rally him. Becky organized a night out. His boss pushed him to take a trip, but Matt declined every offer. Instead, he allowed himself to grieve. For the lost years, the promises broken, the boyhood dream of a love that could survive anything. He spent long evenings in the backyard, listening to the wind move through the pecan trees, letting the ache in his chest settle into something less sharp. One night, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Matt stood barefoot in the grass and finally let himself cry, not for Madison, not for the marriage, but for the younger version of himself who had believed so fiercely in forever. Yet, as the days stretched into weeks, the pain softened. Matt realized he'd gained something, too, a freedom he hadn't known he'd lost. The house was still quiet, but the silence now felt like a blank page, waiting to be filled. For the first time since the beginning, he looked to the future not with dread, but with a cautious hope. The past would always be a part of him. But Matt Collins at last was ready to write his own next chapter. The first true silence after a storm isn't peace, it's emptiness. In the weeks following Madison's departure, Matt Collins became intimately acquainted with that emptiness. The house in Cedar Springs that had once echoed with shared routines and soft laughter now seemed impossibly still, every sound amplified. The ticking clock in the hallway, the refrigerator's hum, his own breath. In the early hours of the morning, he had always imagined heartbreak as loud a crash, a scream, a slammed door. Instead, it crept in on quiet feet, settling into the empty spaces left behind. For the first few days, Matt moved through his routines, as if in a trance. He woke up, made coffee, showered, dressed, went to work, came home. The world outside spun on. Customers still needed test drives at the dealership. Bills still arrived in the mail. Becky still texted every other evening to check in. But everything was filtered through a layer of numbness, as if he were living behind glass. His mother called almost daily. Elaine's voice, a blend of worry and gentle insistence, tried to fill the void. "Come over for dinner, Matt. You shouldn't be alone." At first, he made excuses: too busy at work, not hungry, feeling tired. But eventually, he relented. Sitting in her familiar kitchen, he listened to her stories and advice, grateful for the distraction yet aware of the unspoken question in her eyes. Would he ever trust again? The gossip in Cedar Springs was relentless. Word of the divorce and Madison's disappearance spread quickly. Some neighbors offered sympathy, others delivered thinly veiled judgment. At the dealership, a few co-workers looked at Matt with a new wariness, as if betrayal was contagious. One afternoon, his manager, Mr. Torres, pulled him aside. "You know, Collins, everyone makes mistakes. Don't let this mess up your head. There's life after all this." He tried at first to do what everyone expected. Becky convinced him to join a group for trivia night at the pub. He sat through the laughter and flirtations, smiling politely, feeling like an actor in someone else's story. A well-meaning friend set him up with a local nurse, and though she was kind and interesting, the conversation felt forced, his heart unwilling to open. The hardest part wasn't being alone, it was realizing that, in many ways, he'd been alone for longer than he'd admitted. The difference now was the honesty of it. There were no more half-truths, no anxious waiting for the other shoe to drop. Instead, there was only himself and the quiet work of healing. Matt spent long evenings in the backyard, under the old pecan tree, watching the light change and the seasons turn. He started running again, feeling his lungs burn and his mind clear with each mile. Sometimes he'd drive out to the lake, park beneath the wide Texas sky, and let his thoughts run wild. There were moments when he let himself remember the good days with Madison, the laughter, the comfort of a familiar hand in his. He didn't push those memories away, but he didn't cling to them either. His mother and Becky both tried, in different ways, to nudge him forward. "You deserve to be happy," Elaine insisted, her eyes damp. Becky, ever the pragmatist, texted blunt reminders. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone. Just live." The town, meanwhile, moved on. People stopped whispering. Madison's name faded from daily conversation. News came that she'd left Cedar Springs entirely. Some said California. Others whispered about a job in Denver. Matt felt a strange relief. Her absence made space for something else, even if he didn't know what that was yet. One evening, returning from a late walk, Matt found a plain envelope in his mailbox. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in neat, careful script. "You don't owe anyone your forgiveness, just your future." There was no signature, no clue to the author. For a long moment, Matt stared at the words, feeling a small, unexpected spark inside him. The note didn't erase his pain or answer all his questions, but it was a turning point, a gentle permission to move on, to let go of the guilt and self-blame he'd carried for so long. That night, Matt stood at his window, watching the town settle into darkness. The ache remained, but it had changed less, an open wound, more a scar, proof that he'd survived. For the first time since the beginning, he found himself curious about tomorrow. He didn't know what the future held, but as he lay in bed, the anonymous letter tucked beneath his pillow, Matt Collins knew one thing with certainty. He was done living in the aftermath. The rest was still unwritten. The first real signs of change never arrive as thunder. For Matt Collins, healing crept in on silent feet, a genuine laugh at a joke on the radio, a morning where coffee tasted almost sweet, a weekend where the ache in his chest didn't feel so heavy. By the time April brought its warm breezes to Cedar Springs, Matt realized he hadn't thought of Madison in days. One evening, Becky appeared at his door, waving 2 tickets. "No excuses, Collins. We're going away this weekend." "Fresh air, old friends. You need this." Matt considered making up a reason to stay behind, but there was something in Becky's stubborn grin that softened his resolve. The drive to Lake Whitney with a small group of old classmates felt oddly liberating. The sun was bright, music spilled from the speakers, and for the first time in a long while, Matt let himself be present. He laughed at inside jokes, roasted marshmallows by the fire, and, when conversation drifted to the inevitable topic of heartbreak, found himself nodding rather than cringing. On the second day, as the group planned a hike around the lake, Becky introduced Matt to Samantha Hayes, a friend from her yoga class. Sam was unlike anyone Matt had met. Open, funny, a little guarded with sharp blue eyes and a quick wit that kept everyone on their toes. She joked about her inability to pitch a tent, teased Matt for his serious face, and somehow made awkward silences feel comfortable. Later, while others paired off for kayaking, Matt and Sam were left with the canoes. Their initial small talk gave way to deeper conversation as they paddled in lazy circles under the spring Sunday. Sam talked about growing up in New Mexico, her love for mountain air, and her decision to start over in Cedar Springs after a messy breakup. Matt listened, surprised by the ease with which she shared. He found himself telling her things he hadn't admitted to anyone about his failed marriage, his fears, the ways he was still learning to trust himself. That evening, as the group gathered around the fire for stories and cheap wine, Sam's laughter was infectious. Matt felt the old weight in his chest begin to lift. When she caught him watching her, she smiled, not shy, not flirtatious, but warm and inviting. It was a look that said, "I see you, scars and all." On the final night, after everyone else had drifted to their tents, Matt and Sam lingered by the dying fire. The conversation, quieter now, turned to wounds that never fully healed. Sam confessed, her voice barely above a whisper, "I didn't think I'd ever trust you. Sometimes I still don't, but I'd rather risk a broken heart than live closed off." Matt nodded, recognizing his own truth in her words. "I thought I was finished. Like my best years were gone with what I lost. But maybe there's more to life than holding on to pain." A gentle silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of the last ember. They didn't move closer, didn't touch, but something real passed between them, a flicker of hope, tender and uncertain. At dawn, Matt stood by the lakeshore, the world awash in golden light. Sam appeared beside him, a travel mug in hand. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Matt looked at the water, at Sam, at the new day. "Yeah," he said, a soft certainty in his voice. It Island. And for the first time in what felt like forever, he believed it. The return to Cedar Springs was different this time. Matt Collins stepped into his house and noticed how the light fell just right through the kitchen window, how the air smelled faintly of coffee and cut grass. There was a quiet in the space now, but not the hollow, echoing emptiness of those early weeks after the divorce. This quiet felt full, like the slow intake of breath before something new. He found himself moving through his days with more intention. He called his brother in Austin just to catch up, signed up for a beginner's cooking class at the community center, and spent Saturday mornings helping build trails at the nature reserve. At first, these activities felt like distractions, but soon Matt realized he was actually enjoying himself, feeling the world grow a little larger, his perspective a little brighter. One afternoon, as he was organizing his old camera equipment, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Sam Hayes, a picture of her standing in front of a thrift shop, holding up a truly hideous lampshade. "Found your next home decor project. Adventure this weekend?" Matt chuckled, warmth blooming in his chest. He typed back, "Only if you promise not to bring that thing into my house." Their friendship grew in slow, gentle increments. Coffee at the bookshop on Main, walks in the park, where Sam pointed out the best trees for climbing, and Matt quietly took mental snapshots of her laughter. They volunteered at the animal shelter together, organized a bake sale for the food pantry, attended a pottery class where Matt's mug collapsed spectacularly in the kiln. "That's modern art," Sam teased, and Matt found himself laughing without reservation. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't looking over his shoulder or waiting for the past to catch up. Madison became less a wound and more a faded photograph, something that had shaped him but no longer defined his every thought. He learned, with Sam's patient encouragement, to savor the present. A warm slice of pie, a spontaneous road trip, an off-key sing-along to 80-second music in her old Toyota. Still, trust did not return overnight. Matt sometimes hesitated to share pieces of his story, and there were moments when he caught himself bracing for disappointment. Sam noticed, but never pushed. Instead, she met him where he was careful, kind, letting the relationship unfold without hurry or demand. News came, eventually, that Madison had taken a job in Oregon and remarried. When Matt read the update in a mutual friend's email, he felt a surprising calm, a sense that the last door to the past had gently clicked shut. There was no bitterness, only gratitude that their stories had diverged. One Friday evening, as the town square filled with music for the summer festival, Matt and Sam wandered among the crowds, sharing corn dogs and watching children chase fireflies. At the center of the park, beneath strings of lights, Sam slipped her hand into Matt's areas. He looked at her, startled by the boldness, but didn't pull away. Instead, he squeezed her hand gently, feeling the steady thrum of his own heartbeat, amazed at how natural it felt. Later, as the music faded and people drifted home, Matt and Sam sat on the courthouse steps. The night air was soft and cool. Matt turned to Sam, gratitude shining in his eyes. "You know, I used to think happiness was a finish line. Now I think it's more like this, just noticing the good, letting it in." Sam smiled, her fingers threading through his. "Slow and steady, right?" Matt nodded, content. For the first time, he was no longer waiting for life to start again. He was already in the middle of it. And as the town settled into darkness, he knew happiness, at last, was blooming, quietly and bravely, right where he stood. On a bright Sunday morning, Matt Collins woke to the gentle hum of a world at rest. Sunlight spilled through the kitchen window as he brewed coffee, its aroma mixing with the scent of fresh earth drifting in from the garden. There was no rush, no tension, only the soft rhythm of an ordinary day, and for Matt, that was a revelation. He savored the quiet, the steady drip of the coffee maker, the creak of floorboards as he padded barefoot across the house. For years, Silence had been a backdrop for fear or longing. Now it was a comfort, a space he could finally inhabit without unease. Sam arrived just after 9, hair tousled, cheeks pink from her morning jog. "I brought cinnamon rolls," she announced, waving a brown bag triumphantly. Matt grinned, his heart doing that subtle, familiar leap. They ate together on the back porch, the dog from next door lolling in the grass, the sky blue and limitless. Their life together took shape in small rituals, planting tomatoes in raised beds, reading side by side on the porch swing, improvising dinners from whatever the fridge had left. Sometimes Sam would vent about her hectic week at the clinic, her words tumbling out in frustration. Rather than withdrawing, Matt would reach for her hand, offering presence instead of advice. One Friday evening, Sam joined Matt and his mother Elaine for dinner. The conversation at first was stiff, Elaine's questions polite but probing. Over homemade lasagna, though, the mood softened. Sam shared stories about her own family, her mother's stubborn optimism, her father's terrible puns, and by dessert, laughter filled the kitchen. Later, as Sam helped Elaine clear the dishes, Matt felt an unfamiliar pride. He was building something lasting, something safe. The town of Cedar Springs became friendlier too. Neighbors stopped by with fresh eggs or a loaf of bread. The mailman lingered to chat about the weather. Matt's sense of community, once dulled by grief and isolation, quietly revived itself. He and Sam volunteered at the local library, organized a donation drive for the animal shelter, and started attending the monthly farmers market together. Each event was unremarkable on its own, but strung together, they wove a net of belonging beneath his daily life. There were challenges, of course. Sam's job sometimes kept her late, and Matt's nerves would twinge with old insecurities. Once, a miscommunication led to a tense argument over dinner. But instead of retreating, Matt found himself apologizing first, and Sam quickly followed suit. They laughed about it later, amazed at how much easier it was to be vulnerable with the right person. In the middle of these ordinary days, extraordinary moments found their way in. A spontaneous road trip to the coast, a rainstorm that forced them to dance barefoot on the porch, the discovery of a new coffee shop where Matt learned to love espresso. One Thursday morning, Matt found a letter in the mail addressed to him, but from a name he didn't recognize. Inside was a note from a former student at the community center, thanking Matt for his patience and encouragement. "Your kindness changed my life." Matt folded the letter carefully, a deep sense of gratitude settling in his chest. He realized that healing had not come in a sudden wave, but in the steady accumulation of good days, gentle gestures, and the willingness to let happiness in. As the sun set, Matt and Sam stood in the garden, their hands dusted with soil, admiring the rows of sprouting vegetables. The world felt small and enormous at once, rich with promise. "I used to think happiness was something you had to chase," Matt said softly. Sam leaned her head on his shoulder. "Maybe it's just something you have to recognize." Matt smiled, peace blooming inside him. The ordinary had become a gift, and in the quiet glow of twilight, he finally, truly, understood its worth. Matt Collins woke before dawn, the autumn air crisp as he laced his shoes and stepped outside. For years, running had been an escape, a way to outrun regret, grief, and the ache of old wounds. Now, it felt different. As he jogged through the quiet streets of Cedar Springs, leaves crackling beneath his feet, Matt realized he was no longer running from anything. He was simply moving forward, one breath at a time. After his run, Matt returned home to the warm aroma of coffee and the soft shuffle of Sam Hayes in the kitchen. She was making pancakes, humming along to a tune only she could hear. Their life had settled into a gentle rhythm, comfortable, imperfect, but undeniably real. That weekend, Matt and Sam set off on their first true adventure together, a road trip to the hill country, no itinerary except to see what the open road might offer. The car was packed with snacks, an old map, and a playlist of songs that spanned decades. There were moments of silence, bursts of laughter, and the kind of small disagreements that ended in shared smiles rather than hurt feelings. On the drive, Matt noticed things he once would have missed. The way Sam's eyes sparkled when she spotted an armadillo by the roadside, how she sang off, key to the radio, the comfort of her hand resting on his knee. There was a sense of discovery, not just of new places, but of the person he was becoming beside her. One afternoon, they stopped at a small town, wandered the farmer's market, and ended up sharing homemade ice cream on the courthouse lawn. Matt watched the children play, the vendors banter, and felt a quiet gratitude for the ordinariness of it all. He realized that happiness was not about erasing the past, but about learning to live alongside it. Back at the inn, Matt found an email from his mother, Elaine. She had written about her own struggles after Matt's father left, how it had taken her years to understand that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. "I'm proud of you," she wrote. "You deserve every bit of light that finds you now." Matt read the message twice, feeling the weight and warmth of her words. Becky, too, checked in. She was seeing someone new, a teacher at the high school. "I think you'd like him," she teased in a text. Matt felt a deep happiness for his friend, understanding now how much courage it took to open up after heartbreak. During the trip, Sam and Matt had their first real argument, a silly spat over which direction to take, both of them laughing through their stubbornness. Instead of letting fear or pride get in the way, Matt simply apologized, and Sam did too. They both knew. Everyone has scars, and sometimes love is about giving each other room to be scared and brave at the same time. That night in a quiet motel room, they talked about their pasts, their fears, and the dreams they had for the future. Matt told Sam about the hardest nights after Madison left, how he had once doubted he could trust again. Sam shared her own story, the betrayals that had shaped her, the hope she still carried. They didn't promise forever, but they promised honesty, and that was enough. The next morning, as the sun rose in brilliant gold over the horizon, Matt and Sam stood together on the balcony, wrapped in a single blanket. Light washed over their faces, chasing away the last shadows of old pain. For the first time, Matt felt free of bitterness, of guilt, of the belief that happiness was something he had to earn. Together, they watched the world wake up, knowing there would still be storms ahead. But with the light pouring in, Matt finally understood. Life wasn't about finding certainty, it was about choosing hope, again and again, and letting the light in. Returning to Cedar Springs, Matt Collins felt the world had quietly shifted. There was a softness to the morning light, a richness to the colors of home that he hadn't noticed in years. He and Sam had unpacked their bags, but more than that, they'd brought back a shared sense of peace. Life was not perfect, never would be, but the air now buzzed with gentle optimism. A week after their trip, Matt met his mother, Elaine, and Becky for coffee at Main Street Brew. The cafe was alive with the sounds of small-town morning, clinking mugs, laughter, the low hum of conversations. Becky arrived first, her new boyfriend in tow, a kind, bespectacled science teacher who instantly fit in with the group. Elaine brought homemade scones, claiming the cafes weren't sweet enough. It was the sort of gathering Matt used to dread, reminders of things lost, questions he couldn't answer. But today, he was present, content to listen, to share, to laugh without restraint. They talked about everything and nothing. Becky asked about the trip, and Matt recounted the winding roads, the laughter, and the silly arguments with Sam. Elaine told stories from her own wild youth, leaving them all in stitches. Somewhere in the midst of it, Matt realized this was happiness, stitched together from the threads of ordinary days and extraordinary grace. After coffee, Matt and Sam visited the Cedar Springs Animal Shelter. They had talked about getting a dog a small, wiggly reminder that love, even when lost, always finds a way back. Sam knelt beside a trembling terrier mixed with wary eyes and a crooked tail. "He's had a rough start," the shelter worker said. Matt met Sam's gaze, and in that silent conversation, they decided the pup was theirs. Naming the dog Murphy, they brought him home that afternoon. He raced clumsily through the house, snuffling every corner, and collapsed in a sunbeam with a sigh of contentment. Watching Murphy, Matt felt a wave of quiet joy. This, he thought, was how new beginnings began, not with grand declarations, but with small acts of hope. Evening settled into a routine. Sam tending her garden, Matt fixing dinner, Murphy curled at their feet. Sometimes Elaine joined them for Sunday supper, sharing recipes and gentle advice. Becky and her boyfriend stopped by for game nights, their laughter echoing through the house. Life was built, not in great leaps, but in the steady work of showing up, of choosing kindness again and again. As autumn slipped into winter, Matt realized how much he had changed. The wounds of his marriage had healed into scars visible, but no longer painful. He had forgiven Madison, not because she deserved it, but because he deserved peace. More importantly, he had forgiven himself. One frosty morning, Matt, Sam, Murphy, and Elaine walked the path around Cedar Springs Lake. The sky blushed pink, the surface of the water shimmering. They stopped to skip stones, Murphy chasing after geese with comic determination. Matt watched his mother and Sam share a quiet conversation, the kind that passes between two people who understand love's complexities. Pausing at the water's edge, Matt looked back on his journey. The heartbreak, the slow work of healing, the courage it took to open his heart again. He knew life would still bring storms, but he was not afraid. Surrounded by those he loved, Matt felt ready for whatever the horizon might hold. As the sun rose higher, the little group continued around the lake, laughter and hope rising with them. In that perfect, ordinary moment, Matt understood. Happiness was not a destination, but a way of moving through the world with openness, with courage, and with a heart willing to love again. The story wasn't over, it was only just beginning.